Dr. Maya Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the crystalline platform of Nexus Station, her worn leather satchel clutched tightly against her chest. The massive space station hung in the void between three star systems, serving as the galaxy's premier center for xenolinguistic studies. At 19, Maya was the youngest human ever accepted into the Galactic Language Institute, a fact that seemed to amuse rather than impress her alien classmates. The station's central hub buzzed with activity as dozens of species mingled in the common areas. Tall, ethereal Valdarians glided past on gossamer wings, their melodic voices creating harmonious conversations that sounded more like songs than speech. Stocky Krugnari engineers stomped by in their mechanical exoskeletons, their guttural language punctuated by the hiss of hydraulics. Most imposing were the Zephyrians, standing nearly 3 meters tall with iridescent scales that shifted, color with their emotions. Maya had studied all these languages and more during her accelerated doctoral program on Earth. While other students spent years mastering a single alien tongue, she had absorbed 17 different linguistic systems in just 3 years. Her professors called it impossible. Her peers whispered about genetic modifications or hidden technology. The truth was simpler and more mundane. Maya's brain was wired differently, allowing her to recognize patterns in language that others missed entirely. "The human child arrives," sneered Vexlar, a prominent Zephyrian student whose scales currently displayed the deep purple of disdain. He towered over Maya as she approached the registration desk, his reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smirk among his species. "Tell me, little primate, how many of your planet's simple dialects do you speak? 2? Perhaps 3 if you're particularly gifted?" Several nearby students turned to watch the confrontation. Maya recognized a few faces from the academic journals, promising researchers and linguistic prodigies from across the galaxy. Their expressions ranged from curious to condescending, but none showed the respect typically afforded to a fellow scholar. "Currently, I'm fluent in 47 languages," Maya replied calmly, not bothering to look up from her registration tablet. "That includes 6 Terran languages, 12 Centaurian dialects, 8 Andromedan variants, and 21 others from various systems." Vexlar's scales flickered to amber, the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. "Fluent? Child, do you even understand what that word means in an academic context? I have spent 15 cycles mastering the intricacies of just 3 languages. Each possesses layers of meaning that take decades to comprehend fully." 15 cycles, Maya mused, finally looking up at the imposing alien. "That's roughly 30 Earth years. Impressive dedication, though I suspect your approach might be somewhat inefficient." The gathered crowd fell silent. Questioning a Zephyrian's methods was considered deeply insulting in their culture. Vexlar's scales shifted to a dangerous crimson as he leaned down toward Maya, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Perhaps you would care to demonstrate this efficiency, human. Tomorrow's advanced seminar covers Drachmothian linguistic structures. It's considered the most complex language in known space, so intricate that only 3 non-Drachmothians have ever achieved basic conversational ability." Maya felt a familiar tingle of excitement at the challenge. Drachmothian was indeed legendary for its complexity, incorporating not just vocal elements but also electromagnetic field modulations and quantum state references that required specialized organs to produce properly. Most species couldn't even perceive all the necessary components, let alone speak them. "I'll be there," she said simply. The next morning, Maya sat in the back of Professor Thalkmet's advanced seminar, surrounded by the galaxy's most promising xenolinguistic students. The professor, an ancient Valdarian whose translucent wings had taken on the silver hue of advanced age, floated gracefully at the front of the chamber. "Today we examine the grammatical foundations of High Drachmothian," Thalkmet announced, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species. "This language predates most civilizations by millennia and incorporates temporal concepts that many cultures cannot even conceptualize." Maya opened her tablet and began taking notes as the professor displayed complex linguistic charts. Drachmothian writing resembled a 3-dimensional maze of interconnected symbols, each representing not just concepts but relationships between ideas across multiple time streams. Vexlar sat several rows ahead, occasionally glancing back at Maya with poorly concealed amusement. His scales maintained a steady blue-green color indicating confidence and superiority. Around him, other students struggled with even the most basic pronunciation guides. The fundamental challenge, Professor Thalkmet continued, is that Drachmothian concepts of time are nonlinear. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously within their linguistic structure. A single sentence might reference events from multiple temporal states, with the speaker's emotional resonance determining which time stream takes precedence. Maya's pencil moved rapidly across her tablet, not just copying the professor's notes but adding her own observations. She could see patterns emerging in the language structure that seemed to follow mathematical principles similar to quantum mechanics. Where others saw chaos, she saw elegant order. "Miss Chen," Professor Thalkmet's voice cut through her concentration, "perhaps you would like to attempt the pronunciation exercise?" The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. On the display screen, a series of Drachmothian phrases waited, their meanings supposedly beyond the comprehension of most graduate students. Maya stood slowly, feeling dozens of alien eyes upon her. Vexler's scales had shifted to bright orange, anticipation mixed with malicious satisfaction. He clearly expected her to fail spectacularly in front of the entire class. "The first phrase appears to be a greeting," Maya began, her voice steady despite the pressure. "But it's not just saying hello. It's acknowledging the listener's past, present, and potential future selves simultaneously, while expressing hope for positive temporal convergence." She paused, studying the quantum state modulations that would normally require specialized Drachmothian organs to produce. Then, to everyone's amazement, she began to speak. Her voice took on harmonic overtones that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords, somehow approximating the electromagnetic components of true Drachmothian speech. The words flowed like liquid music, complex and beautiful in ways that transcended normal language. Maya wasn't just reciting phrases. She was thinking in Drachmothian, her mind adapting to the non-linear temporal concepts as if they were as natural as breathing. When she finished, the silence stretched for long seconds. Professor Thalkmet's silver wings had gone completely still, his usual graceful movements frozen in shock. Several students sat with their mouths agape, their various alien physiologies displaying universal amazement. "Impossible," Vexlar whispered, his scales cycling rapidly through colors that indicated confusion and disbelief. "No human should be able to." "How did you—" Maya sat back down, her heart racing from the effort. She had done something unprecedented, but she wasn't entirely sure how. The language had simply made sense to her, its patterns clicking into place like pieces of a vast, beautiful puzzle. What she didn't know was that her demonstration had been overheard by more than just her classmates. Deep in the station's restricted sections, ancient sensors had detected something impossible. A human speaking perfect Drachmothian. For the first time in centuries, the great dragons stirred from their slumber. The dormitories on Nexus Station were designed to accommodate dozens of different species, but Maya found herself alone in the human section most evenings. Tonight was no exception, as she sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, surrounded by holographic displays showing Drachmothian texts that she had somehow acquired access to through the station's vast digital library. Word of her performance in Professor Thalkmet's class had spread quickly through the academic community. Some students approached her with grudging respect, others with open suspicion. Vexlar and his circle of followers had taken to whispering among themselves whenever she passed, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed her presence. Maya barely noticed the social dynamics. She was too fascinated by what she had discovered about Drachmothian linguistic structure. The language wasn't just complex, it was revolutionary. It suggested ways of thinking about reality that challenged fundamental assumptions about time, consciousness, and communication itself. Her concentration was broken by a soft chime from her door panel. Maya looked up to see Professor Thalkmet hovering in her doorway, his silver wings creating gentle air currents that made the holographic displays flicker. "Professor? It's rather late for office hours." The elderly Valdarian entered her room without invitation, his usual musical voice carrying an undertone of urgency. "Miss Chen, we need to discuss your performance today. What you did should not have been possible." Maya minimized her displays and gestured for the professor to take the room's single chair. Instead, he remained floating, his luminous eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. I know it's unusual for a human to grasp Drachmothian concepts so quickly, Maya began, but Thalkamet raised a delicate hand to stop her. Not unusual, Miss Chen. Impossible. I have studied xenolinguistics for over 2 centuries. In that time, I have seen perhaps a dozen individuals from any species achieve even basic Drachmothian comprehension. What you demonstrated today. You were thinking in their language, not just speaking it. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. I don't understand what you're getting at. Professor Thalkmet moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The Drachmothians are extinct, Miss Chen. They have been for nearly 3,000 years. But they left behind more than just their language. They left behind guardians. The professor activated a small device from his robes, and the room's normal lighting dimmed. New holographic displays materialized, showing ancient star charts and symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The Drachmothians were the first truly spacefaring civilization in this galaxy, Thalkmet continued. They explored, cataloged, and protected countless worlds for millions of years before the rest of us had even developed written language. When they finally passed on, they established protocols to ensure their knowledge wouldn't be lost. Maya stared at the displays, recognizing some of the symbols from her linguistic studies but seeing them now in an entirely new context. Protocols? Living guardians, Miss Chen. Beings of immense power and intelligence who were tasked with preserving Drachmothian knowledge until worthy successors could be found. Most scholars believe them to be myth, but I have seen evidence of their existence. The displays shifted, showing what appeared to be massive creatures with serpentine bodies and wings that seemed to bend light around them. Even in holographic form, they radiated an aura of ancient majesty and terrible power. Dragons, Maya whispered, the word escaping her lips before she could stop it. Professor Thalkmet's wings went completely still. How did you know that term? It's not in any of the standard texts. Maya felt her heart racing as memories surfaced. Not her own memories, but something deeper. Ancient knowledge that seemed to whisper at the edges of her consciousness. I'm not sure. It just felt right. Miss Chen, I need you to understand the gravity of what I'm telling you. These guardians have been dormant for centuries, waiting for someone who could truly comprehend Drachmothian thought patterns. Your demonstration today may have awakened something that has slept since before human civilization began. As if summoned, by his words, Maya's personal communication device began to emit a low, harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in her bones. The sound was unlike anything she had ever heard, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Professor Thalkmet stepped back, his scales shifting to pale white with fear. They're calling to you. The tone grew stronger, more complex, and Maya found herself understanding it not as sound but as language. Ancient words flowed through her mind, concepts that had no equivalent in any modern tongue. The message was simple yet profound. Come. I have to go, Maya said, standing despite her trembling legs. The call was becoming impossible to ignore, pulling at something deep in her genetic memory. Miss Chen, you don't understand what you're dealing with. These beings exist outside normal spacetime. They have power beyond imagination, if they've chosen you. Thalkmet trailed off, his luminous eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Chosen me for what? To be their voice in this age, to carry their knowledge forward, to speak for them when words are needed. The professor's voice carried the weight of prophecy. But first, you must prove yourself worthy. The harmonic calling intensified, and Maya could feel her consciousness being drawn toward something vast and ancient. Through her room's viewport, she could see stars that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the alien song. Where are they? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Level 0, Professor Thalkmet whispered. The restricted section that supposedly doesn't exist. Miss Chen, if you choose to answer their call, there may be no coming back. The dragons of the Drachmothians are not creatures to be trifled with. Maya gathered her satchel and headed for the door, the calling now so strong that resistance seemed impossible. Professor, if they wanted to harm me, I don't think a few levels of station security would stop them. That's not what I meant, Thalkmet called after her. I meant you may not come back as the same person who goes down there. Maya paused at the threshold, looking back at the elderly Valdarian who had become her unlikely mentor. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. The corridors of Nexus Station seemed different as Maya made her way toward the central lift system. The normal bustle of student life had quieted to a whisper, and the few beings she encountered seemed to unconsciously step aside as she passed. The harmonic calling had become a part of her now, not just heard but felt in every cell of her body. When she reached the lift controls, Maya wasn't surprised to find that her student access card now granted her clearance to levels that had previously been forbidden. The station's artificial intelligence had apparently been overridden by something far older and more powerful. As the lift descended past the lowest official levels, Maya closed her eyes and let the ancient song wash over her. Whatever waited, below would change everything, not just for her but potentially for the entire galaxy. The Drachmothian legacy was about to awaken, and somehow, impossibly, she had become its key. The lift slowed to a stop at a level that, according to all official records, did not exist. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that stretched into darkness lit only by symbols that glowed with their own inner fire. At the far end, Maya could sense something vast and patient, waiting for her arrival after centuries of slumber. She stepped forward into the unknown, carrying with her the hopes and fears of every species that had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The corridor stretched endlessly before Maya, its walls covered in Drachmothian script that seemed to shift and flow like living text. Each symbol pulsed with soft bioluminescence, creating patterns that told stories of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity had even learned to make fire. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with ancient energy that made her skin tingle with each breath. As she walked deeper into the forbidden level, Maya began to understand that this wasn't just a hidden section of the station. The architecture was wrong for modern construction, with sweeping curves and impossible angles that seemed to bend space itself. This place was older than Nexus Station, older than any current galactic civilization. It was a remnant of the Drachmothians themselves, somehow preserved and integrated into the structure of the modern facility. The harmonic calling grew stronger with each step, no longer just a sound but a physical force that guided her forward. Maya found herself able to read the flowing script without conscious effort, the symbols translating themselves directly into concepts that bypassed her normal language centers. The walls told of the Great Convergence when the Drachmothians had first encountered other intelligent species and realized they would not be alone in the universe forever. At the end of the corridor, massive doors stood open, revealing a chamber that defied comprehension. The ceiling soared impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed to contain their own depth. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls, each one resonating with harmonics that created a symphony of sound and light. At the center of the vast space, a pool of liquid that wasn't quite water reflected images of distant stars and worlds. But it was the presence lurking in the shadows beyond the pool that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. The dragon was impossibly massive, its serpentine body coiled around crystalline pillars that supported the chamber's impossible architecture. Scales that seemed to be made of condensed starlight shifted from deep purple to brilliant gold as the creature became aware of her presence. When it opened its eyes, Maya saw galaxies being born and dying in their depths. So, the dragon spoke, its voice a harmony of frequencies that bypassed her ears entirely and resonated directly in her mind. The inheritor finally arrives. We have been waiting for you, Maya Chen of Terra. Maya found her voice, though it seemed impossibly small in the vast chamber. You know who I am? We know what you are, the dragon replied, its massive head lowering until its eyes were level with hers. You carry within you the genetic memory of our creators, filtered through millions of years of evolution and passed down through bloodlines that stretch back to the first convergence. Creators? Maya stepped closer to the pool, seeing her reflection multiplied infinitely in its surface. But I thought the Drachmothians were your species. The dragon's laughter was like the sound of stellar formation, beautiful and terrifying. Child, the Drachmothians were builders, explorers, teachers. But they were not the first. They carried within them the echoes of those who came before, just as you carry echoes of them. Images began to form in the pool's surface, showing Maya visions of Earth in its distant past. She saw early hominids gazing up at strange lights in the sky, saw ancient civilizations receiving visitors who taught them language and mathematics and art. She saw the careful genetic modifications that had been made over millennia, enhancing certain bloodlines with the capacity for linguistic transcendence. You're saying humans are descendants of the Drachmothians? Not descendants, the dragon corrected. Inheritors. When the Drachmothians realized their time was ending, they seeded dozens of worlds with the genetic potential for linguistic consciousness. Most of those bloodlines have been diluted over time, but occasionally, very rarely, an individual emerges who carries the full gift. Maya felt overwhelmed by the implications. Why me? Why now? The dragon moved with fluid grace despite its enormous size, circling the pool as it spoke. Because the galaxy stands at a crossroads, child. The old barriers between species are breaking down. Trade and communication are expanding at an unprecedented rate, but with that expansion comes danger. New images formed in the pool, showing fleets of ships unlike anything Maya had seen in current galactic databases. They were sleek and predatory, their hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. As she watched, these ships descended upon peaceful worlds, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. The Devourers, the dragon continued, its mental voice taking on tones of ancient sadness and rage. They come from beyond the galactic rim. Drawn by the increasing psychic noise of interspecies communication, they consume not just life, but language itself, leaving behind worlds where no intelligent thought can survive. Maya felt a chill deeper than any she had ever experienced. When? Soon. Perhaps within your lifetime. Perhaps sooner. Our long-range sensors have detected the first scout ships entering the outer systems. They are testing our defenses, learning our languages, preparing for the final feast. The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Every species in the galaxy, all the diverse cultures and civilizations she had studied, could face extinction from an enemy that consumed the very essence of communication and thought. What can be done to stop them? The dragon's eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. The Drachmothians faced this threat once before, eons ago. They developed a defense, but it required a unified response from all intelligent species, a single voice that could speak for the entire galaxy, using harmonics that transcend individual languages and reach into the fundamental frequencies of consciousness itself. Maya began to understand the terrible weight that was settling on her shoulders. The galactic voice. Yes, but such a voice cannot simply be appointed or elected. It must be chosen by the deep structures of language itself, tested and proven, worthy through trials that push the boundaries of what communication can achieve. The dragon rose to its full height, and Maya realized that the creature was even larger than she had initially thought. Its head nearly touched the ceiling of the vast chamber, and its wings, when fully extended, could have sheltered a small city. Your performance in the classroom was not chance, Maya-chen. It was the first test, and you passed beyond all expectations. But greater trials await. What kind of trials? You must prove that you can speak not just to different species, but to different levels of consciousness. You must communicate with beings of pure energy, with artificial intelligences that think in mathematical abstractions, with hive minds that have no concept of individual identity. Most importantly, you must learn to speak with the Devourers themselves. Maya felt her knees go weak. Communicate with them? I thought they consumed language. They do, but they are not mindless destroyers. They are ancient beings with their own agenda, their own pain. The last galactic voice managed to turn them away through words alone. But the secret of that communication was lost when the Drachmothians passed into history. The dragon lowered its head again, bringing its massive eye close to Maya's face. We can teach you what we know, child, but the true test will come when you must create something new. A form of communication that has never existed before. Words, that can touch the deepest core of any consciousness, no matter how alien or hostile. Maya thought of all the students back in the dormitories pursuing their studies in blissful ignorance of the threat approaching from beyond the stars. She thought of Earth, of her family, and friends, who had no idea that their existence might depend on the linguistic abilities of one young woman. If I agree to this, what happens to my life, my research, my future? The dragon's expression, insofar as Maya could read it, became almost gentle. Those things will not disappear, child, but they will be transformed, just as you will be transformed. You will become something more than human, more than any single species. You will become the voice of life itself. Maya closed her eyes and felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a cloak. When she opened them again, her decision was made. Where do we begin? Maya's training began immediately, though she quickly discovered that traditional concepts of time had little meaning in the dragon's domain. The chamber existed in a state of temporal flux, where minutes could stretch into hours or collapse into seconds depending on the complexity of the lessons being taught. The dragon, who eventually revealed its name as Kethviren the Memory Keeper, possessed knowledge that spanned millions of years and countless civilizations. The first lesson nearly broke her mind. Human concepts of language are linear, Kethviren explained as Maya floated in the crystalline pool. Her consciousness expanded beyond her physical form. You think in sequences, subject, predicate, object, beginning, middle, end. But true communication exists in dimensional matrices where all meaning exists simultaneously. Maya found herself experiencing language as the Drachmothians had, not as words spoken in time, but as crystalline structures of pure meaning that could be perceived from infinite angles. Each concept contained within it all possible variations and interpretations, accessible through shifts in mental perspective that required rewiring her entire cognitive framework. The process was agonizing. For 3 days, Maya existed in a state of controlled linguistic breakdown as her human brain struggled to accommodate ways of thinking that had evolved over cosmic timescales. She experienced moments where she forgot how to form sentences in any recognizable language, periods where she could only communicate through harmonics that made the chamber's crystals sing in response. Kethviren guided her through each crisis with patient wisdom, sharing fragments of the dragon's own experiences, learning to communicate across the vast gulfs of space and time. The pain you feel is growth, the ancient being explained. You are becoming something that has never existed before, a bridge between limited and unlimited consciousness. By the 4th day, Maya began to stabilize. She found she could switch between normal human speech and the multidimensional Drachmothian thought forms with increasing ease. More importantly, she was beginning to understand how different species' languages reflected their fundamental ways of perceiving reality. Now comes the true test, Kethviren announced. You must learn to speak with beings who exist outside the normal parameters of biological consciousness. The chamber transformed around them, its crystalline walls becoming transparent to reveal the void of space beyond. But this was not empty space. Maya could perceive currents of energy flowing between the stars, patterns of communication that operated on galactic scales. The luminari, Kethviren explained, exist as pure electromagnetic consciousness. They think in frequencies and communicate through manipulation of stellar radiation. To speak with them, you must learn to encode meaning directly into light itself. Maya spent hours learning to modulate her brain's electrical activity in ways that could influence the chamber's energy fields. It was like learning to paint with cosmic forces, creating meaning through combinations of wavelength and intensity that carried emotional and conceptual content across vast distances. Her first successful communication with the luminari was a simple greeting, transmitted as a pulse of carefully modulated starlight. The response came back as a symphony of colors that conveyed surprise, curiosity, and something like joy that these ancient beings of pure energy could share knowledge with a biological entity. But even as Maya celebrated this breakthrough, Kethviren was preparing her for an even greater challenge. The collective of Xerion represents the ultimate expression of hive consciousness, the dragon explained. 30 billion individual minds connected into a single entity that thinks with the processing power of an entire civilization. To communicate with them, you must learn to think as a collective while maintaining your individual identity. This lesson nearly shattered Maya's sense of self entirely. She found her consciousness suddenly connected to vast networks of alien thought, experiencing the sensation of being simultaneously one person and billions of people. Every decision, every thought, was the product of massive internal debates between different aspects of the collective mind. Learning to address the collective required Maya to speak not just to the consensus consciousness, but to the underlying structure that allowed billions of minds to function as one. She had to find ways to introduce new concepts that could propagate through the entire network without causing cognitive chaos. Weeks passed in the chamber as Maya mastered increasingly exotic forms of communication. She learned to speak with artificial intelligences that thought in pure mathematics, their conversations taking the form of evolving equations that painted stories across multidimensional computational spaces. She communicated with crystalline entities whose thoughts moved at geological speeds, each concept taking centuries to fully form. Most challenging of all, she learned to interface with the quantum consciousness of beings who existed in superposition states, simultaneously experiencing all possible outcomes of every decision, until the moment communication collapsed their reality into a single configuration. With each success, Maya felt herself changing on a fundamental level. Her human limitations were not disappearing, but they were being transcended. She was becoming something new, still recognizably Maya Chen, but also something larger and more capable than any single species could produce. Meanwhile, above in the normal levels of Nexus Station, her absence had not gone unnoticed. Vexler and his followers had initially assumed she was hiding in shame after her impossible demonstration in Drachmothian class. But as days turned to weeks with no sign of the human prodigy, rumors began to spread. Professor Thalkemet maintained official silence about Maya's whereabouts, but his increasingly anxious behavior did not escape notice. The elderly Valdarian had begun spending his free time studying ancient texts and star charts, muttering to himself in languages so old that most translation protocols couldn't parse them. Other students reported strange dreams, visions of vast creatures stirring in the depths of space, of lights moving between the stars in patterns that seemed almost linguistic. The more sensitive among them complained of hearing harmonics that seemed to come from the station's structure itself, songs that spoke of ancient glory and approaching darkness. Deep in the restricted levels, Maya was approaching the final phase of her training. She had learned to communicate with dozens of forms of consciousness that most people couldn't even imagine, but Kethaviron's expression had grown increasingly grave as they approached the ultimate test. "Child," the dragon said, its mental voice heavy with both pride and sorrow, "you have exceeded even our most optimistic projections. In mere weeks you have achieved mastery of communication forms that took the Drachmothians centuries to develop. But now comes the trial that will determine whether you are truly ready to face what approaches." Maya felt a chill of anticipation. "The Devourers? Not yet. First you must prove that you can maintain your sanity and your compassion when faced with a consciousness so alien, so fundamentally hostile to biological life, that even speaking with it may damage your soul. You must learn to communicate with the null." The chamber around them began to change, its crystalline beauty fading to stark metallic surfaces. The warm harmonics that had filled the space were replaced by an absence of sound so complete that Maya could hear her own heartbeat echoing like thunder. "What is the null?" Kethaviron's form seemed to flicker and dim, as if the very act of explaining diminished the dragon's presence. "It is the opposite of consciousness, child. Not unconsciousness, but anti-consciousness. A force that exists to negate thought, to reduce complexity to simplicity, meaning to meaninglessness. It is what the Devourers serve and what they spread wherever they go." Maya felt a terror unlike anything she had experienced during her training. This was not just a difficult communication challenge. This was contact with something that represented the antithesis of everything she had learned to value. Is it necessary? To face the Devourers, you must understand their motivation. And to understand their motivation, you must speak with the force that drives them. Are you ready? Maya took a deep breath and felt the weight of the galaxy's future settling on her shoulders. I'm ready. The chamber transformed into something that challenged Maya's ability to perceive reality itself. Where before there had been crystalline beauty and harmonic resonance, now there was an absence so profound that it seemed to consume light, sound, and meaning. The walls had become surfaces that reflected nothing. Surfaces that seemed to eat the very concept of reflection. Kethaviron's presence dimmed to barely perceptible whispers of thought. the dragon's ancient consciousness struggling to maintain coherence in proximity to the null. "Remember, child," came the fading mental voice. "You are not trying to defeat or overcome the null. You are trying to understand it, to find some thread of communication that will allow you to comprehend why it drives the devourers toward galactic extinction." Maya stood at the center of the transformed chamber, feeling the weight of absolute emptiness pressing against her consciousness from all directions. This was not the peaceful void of space filled with potential and distant stars. This was nothingness given form, the active negation of existence itself. She reached out with the communication techniques she had learned, trying to establish contact with whatever intelligence might lurk within the null. Traditional language failed immediately, dissolving into meaningless noise the moment it approached the void. The multidimensional thought forms of the Drachmothian simply ceased to exist in the null's presence. For hours, Maya tried every form of communication she had mastered. Energy patterns were absorbed without response. Mathematical concepts collapsed into undefined zeros. Even the quantum consciousness techniques that had allowed her to speak with superposition beings found no purchase in the absolute certainty of nothingness. Just as she was beginning to despair, Maya realized her mistake. She had been trying to communicate with the null using forms of language that assumed the existence of meaning, consciousness, and identity, but the null was the absence of these things. To speak with it, she would need to find a way to communicate through absence itself. Maya closed her eyes and began to systematically dismantle her own thought processes. Instead of projecting meaning outward, she created spaces of carefully structured emptiness within her mind. Instead of speaking words, she spoke silences. Instead of offering concepts, she offered the precise absence of concepts. The response was immediate and terrifying. The null spoke, if it could be called speaking, through the structured dissolution of reality around her. Maya experienced communication not as the sharing of ideas, but as the shared experience of unbecoming. For a moment that lasted eternities, she understood what it meant to exist as pure negation. The null was not evil in any sense that biological minds could comprehend. It was simply the universe's correction mechanism, existing to balance the endless expansion of complexity and consciousness with the fundamental entropy that kept reality stable. Where life created infinite diversity and meaning, the null provided the necessary counterweight of simplification and ending. Through their impossible communion, Maya began to understand the cosmic perspective that drove the devourers. They were not destroyers by choice, but servants of a universal principle. Agents of the null who culled excess consciousness when it threatened to destabilize the fabric of reality itself. In their view, the current explosion of interspecies communication and galactic civilization represented a dangerous imbalance that required correction. The revelation was staggering. The devourers believed they were saving the universe by consuming the growing network of galactic consciousness before it reached a critical mass that could tear apart the fundamental structures of space and time. They saw themselves as necessary gardeners, pruning the tree of existence to prevent it from growing beyond the soil's ability to support it. But Maya also sensed something else in her communion with the null: uncertainty. The ancient force of negation was no longer sure that its perspective was complete. The emergence of beings like Maya, who could communicate across the full spectrum of consciousness while maintaining individual identity, suggested possibilities that the null had not previously considered. Perhaps there was a way for complexity and consciousness to expand without threatening universal stability. Perhaps balance could be achieved through cooperation rather than culling. As Maya maintained her connection with the null, she felt her own consciousness being examined with alien curiosity. The force of negation was learning from her just as she was learning from it, discovering new forms of meaning that existed in harmony with emptiness rather than in opposition to it. The communion lasted for subjective hours, though Maya later learned that only minutes had passed in normal time. When she finally withdrew from the null's presence, she found herself fundamentally changed once again. She now carried within her consciousness a perfect understanding of both creation and destruction, meaning and emptiness, existence and void. Keth Viren's presence strengthened as the chamber returned to its normal crystalline configuration. "What did you learn, child?" Maya struggled to find words for what she had experienced. "The devourers aren't monsters. They're maintenance workers. They genuinely believe they're protecting the universe from a threat we represent. And what threat is that? Consciousness cascade. The idea that if too many minds become connected across galactic distances, the resulting network could generate reality-altering effects that would destabilize the fundamental laws of physics. The dragon's expression grew thoughtful. It is not an unreasonable fear. The Drachmothians themselves worried about such possibilities in their later period. But you have learned something else, have you not? Maya nodded slowly. There might be another way. A form of consciousness that incorporates both creation and negation, meaning and emptiness, a balanced approach that could allow galactic civilization to continue developing without threatening universal stability. The middle path, Kethviren murmured, using a concept that existed in Drachmothian, but had no equivalent in any modern language. It was theoretical when my creators considered it. You are suggesting it might be practical? I think so. But it would require convincing both sides, the galactic civilizations and the Devourers, to trust in a solution that neither of them fully understands. The dragon rose to its full height, its scales shifting through colors that indicated deep contemplation. Child, you have achieved something that even we did not dare hope for. You have not just learned to communicate with the incomprehensible, you have found common ground with it. Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling over her like a mantle. What happens now? Now we prepare for your greatest test. The Devourer fleet has accelerated their approach. Our sensors indicate they will reach the outer colonies within days. You must be ready to speak with them when they arrive. And if I fail? Kethviren's ancient eyes held depths of sorrow accumulated over millions of years. Then this galaxy joins the countless others that have fallen silent in the cosmic dark. But I do not believe you will fail. Maya Chen, you have become something new. Not just human, not just Drachmothian, but a synthesis of biological consciousness and cosmic wisdom that represents hope for all forms of life. The chamber began to shift again, its walls becoming transparent to reveal the stars beyond. Maya could see ships moving between the distant points of light, not the sleek vessels of current galactic civilization, but something older and more purposeful. The dragon fleet was emerging from hiding places throughout the galaxy, ancient guardians awakening for the first time in millennia to support the young human who had become their hope for peace. There is one more lesson, Kethviren said softly. You must learn to speak not just with individual minds or collective consciousnesses, but with entire civilizations simultaneously. When the Devourers arrive, you will need to address every sapient being in the galaxy at once, creating a moment of universal understanding that can change the course of cosmic history. Maya looked out at the stars and felt the vast network of consciousness that connected them, billions of minds across thousands of species, all unknowingly depending on her ability to find words that could bridge the gap between existence and void, between the urge to grow and the need to balance. She was no longer just a linguistic student from Earth. She had become the voice of life itself, and the future of consciousness in the universe rested on her ability to speak words that had never been spoken before. The evacuation of Nexus Station began 3 hours after the first Devourer scouts appeared at the edge of the system. Maya watched from the observation deck of the ancient chamber, as ships of every conceivable design fled toward the inner worlds, carrying students and faculty who had no idea that their salvation might depend on a conversation between a young human and entities that consumed language itself. Professor Thalkmet had been among the last to leave, his luminous eyes filled with worry as he clasped Maya's hands in his delicate fingers. Child, what you attempt today goes beyond courage into the realm of cosmic necessity. Know that regardless of what happens, you have already given the galaxy more hope than it has known in millennia. Now Maya stood alone in the chamber with Kethviren, watching as the Devourer fleet materialized from hyperspace with the terrifying grace of apex predators. Their ships were even more unsettling in reality than they had appeared in the dragon's visions, sleek forms that seemed to bend light around them, creating distortions in space that hurt to look at directly. 12,000 vessels, Kethviren observed, the dragon's mental voice steady, despite the magnitude of the threat. The largest Devourer fleet in recorded history. They are not taking any chances with this galaxy. Maya felt her heart hammering in her chest as she prepared for the most important conversation in galactic history. Around her, the chamber had transformed one final time. becoming a nexus point for communication networks that spanned the entire galaxy. Every inhabited world, every space station, every ship was now connected through ancient Drachmothian relays that had lain dormant for millennia. "They're broadcasting," Maya said, sensing the psychic emanations from the Devourer fleet. The signals were unlike anything she had encountered before, not language in any recognizable sense, but pure intent given form. The message was simple and absolute. "Submit to silence or be silenced. Are you ready?" Keth Viren asked. Maya took a deep breath and reached out with her consciousness, touching the vast network of minds that filled the galaxy. She could feel billions of sapient beings going about their daily lives, unaware that their existence hung in the balance. Scientists on research stations, artists in orbital galleries, children learning their first words in dozens of different languages. All of them connected by the invisible threads of communication. That made civilization possible. "I'm ready." The first contact with the Devourer. Consciousness was like being struck by lightning made of absolute cold. Maya felt her individual awareness nearly shatter under the assault of minds that had spent eons reducing complexity to simplicity, meaning to void. But her training held, and she managed to maintain coherence long enough to establish a communication protocol. The lead Devourer entity identified itself through patterns of negation that roughly translated as silence that brings peace. Its consciousness was vast and ancient, shaped by millions of years of culling excess complexity from the universe. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to dim around its words. Young voice of the carbon-spawned multitude, it communicated through structured absence. "Your species and your allies have grown beyond the acceptable parameters of conscious density. This galaxy must be pruned before your collective. Awareness destabilizes the quantum foundations of local space-time." Maya responded using the balanced communication technique she had developed during her communion with the Null, speaking through careful arrangements of meaning and emptiness. "Ancient silence that brings peace, we acknowledge your concern for universal stability. But we believe there may be another path, one that preserves both consciousness and cosmic balance." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of Devourer minds focused their attention on Maya simultaneously, analyzing her words and the consciousness behind them with surgical precision. She felt her thoughts being dissected, her memories examined, her very identity weighed against standards she could barely comprehend. "Impossible," came the collective response. "Consciousness expansion follows only one path: growth until collapse. We have witnessed this pattern in 17 galaxies, always the same trajectory, always the same requirement for correction. But what if consciousness could learn to self-regulate?" Maya pressed, drawing on her understanding of both biological complexity and cosmic emptiness. What if awareness could expand while maintaining harmony with the underlying void that gives it meaning? Through the galaxy-spanning communication network, Maya began to demonstrate her concept. She showed the Devourers how different species could link their consciousnesses, not in a chaotic explosion of uncontrolled growth, but in carefully balanced patterns that incorporated empty spaces where thought could rest and meaning could settle. She drew on examples from her training, the luminary's ability to think in frequencies while maintaining spaces of peaceful darkness, the collective of Zirian's method of allowing individual thoughts to emerge from and return to group consciousness without losing coherence, the quantum being's mastery of existing in superposition without causing reality collapse. Most importantly, she demonstrated her own consciousness, a human mind that had learned to think in Drachmothian multidimensional patterns while retaining individual identity, that could commune with the Null without being consumed by it, that could serve as a bridge between unlimited complexity and necessary simplicity. "You propose symbiosis between consciousness and void," silence that brings peace observed, its mental tone shifting from hostile certainty to something approaching curiosity. "This has not been attempted, because it requires cooperation between creation and destruction, rather than dominance of one over the other," Maya replied. "The galaxy's civilizations must learn to incorporate silence into their growth, while the forces of negation must learn to guide rather than simply consume." Through the network, Maya felt the minds of billions of sapient beings suddenly become aware of the conversation taking place. The Drachmothian relays had amplified her communication to reach every conscious entity in the galaxy simultaneously. Scientists paused in their research. Artists stopped mid-brushstroke. Children looked up from their games as they all became participants in humanity's greatest diplomatic moment. The Devourer fleet had noticed this development, their ship's distortion fields fluctuating with what might have been surprise. Never before had an entire galaxy become conscious of their presence simultaneously. Usually they arrived in darkness and silence, with only a few leaders aware of what was happening until it was too late. The carbon-spawned demonstrates unprecedented coordination, another Devourer consciousness observed. This level of unified awareness should destabilize local reality matrices, yet quantum coherence remained stable. Maya realized that her demonstration was working. By creating a moment of galaxy-wide consciousness that remained stable and balanced, she was proving that large-scale awareness didn't have to lead to cosmic catastrophe. The key was structure, patterns of thought that included natural breaks and empty spaces, like the pauses between notes that made music possible. "We propose a test period," Maya said, addressing both the Devourers and the galactic civilization simultaneously. "Allow us to develop this balanced approach to consciousness expansion. If we can prove that awareness can grow without threatening universal stability, will you accept an alternative to culling?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch across light years. Maya could feel the Devourer collective consciousness deliberating, weighing probabilities and possibilities with minds that thought in cosmic timescales. Through the network, she sensed the fear and hope of billions of beings waiting for an answer that would determine their fate. Finally, silence that brings peace responded. "We will observe. Your species has demonstrated capabilities we did not predict. If you can maintain galactic consciousness without destabilizing reality, for one complete orbital cycle of your home world, we will consider permanent cessation of culling activities in this galaxy." Maya felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly knocked her unconscious. "And if we fail? Then we resume our function with the understanding that consciousness cannot self-regulate, and this galaxy joins the silence that preserves cosmic order." The Devourer fleet began to withdraw to the galactic rim, their ships fading back into the void as mysteriously as they had appeared. But Maya knew they were still watching, still ready to act if the experiment failed. She had bought the galaxy a year to prove that consciousness and void could coexist in harmony. Now the real work would begin. 1 year later, Maya stood before the Galactic Council in the rebuilt chambers of Nexus Station, no longer the uncertain student who had first arrived at the Xenolinguistics Academy. The transformation was visible not just in her confident bearing, but in the way reality itself seemed to bend slightly around her presence, responding to consciousness patterns that had never existed before in any biological mind. The past year had been the most challenging in galactic history. Word of humanity's bargain with the Devourers had spread throughout inhabited space, creating reactions that ranged from grateful relief to terrified skepticism. Many species had initially resisted the idea of incorporating silent spaces into their communication networks, viewing it as a step backward from the free exchange of ideas that had driven galactic civilization forward. But Maya had worked tirelessly, traveling from world to world with a team of volunteers from dozens of species. Together they had developed new forms of interspecies communication that balanced complexity with emptiness, meaning with void. The results had been remarkable, not just stable consciousness networks, but enhanced creativity and deeper understanding between species that had previously struggled to bridge their differences. Now, as representatives from over 300 civilizations gathered to hear Maya's report, the chamber buzzed with harmonious conversation in languages that had learned to breathe, to pause, to allow silence to give weight to words rather than simply filling every moment with noise. Bexelar was among the assembled delegates, his scales displaying colors that Maya had learned to recognize as deep respect mixed with lingering amazement. The proud Zephyrian, who had once mocked her linguistic abilities, now served as one of her most effective ambassadors, teaching his people the value of structured silence in their traditionally verbose culture. Professor Thalkmet floated near the chamber's center, his silver wings catching light that seemed somehow brighter than it had been a year ago. The elderly Valdarian had become the official chronicler of what scholars were already calling the Great Synthesis, the first successful integration of creation and negation principles in galactic civilization. "Honored delegates," Maya began, her voice carrying harmonics that touched every translation protocol in the chamber, while remaining perfectly comprehensible to each species present. I stand before you today not as a human speaking to aliens, but as consciousness speaking to consciousness, as one part of the greater symphony that we have learned to create together. She gestured, and the chamber's walls became transparent, revealing the space beyond where ships of every conceivable design moved in patterns that were both purposeful and beautiful. Trade convoys, research vessels, and diplomatic missions created streams of light between the stars. But now those streams included planned gaps, moments of peaceful emptiness that allowed the flow of galactic civilization to maintain its rhythm without overwhelming the underlying structures of reality. So, silence that brings peace and its collective have monitored our progress throughout this trial. Period, Maya continued. They have observed our success in creating stable, self-regulating consciousness networks that span galactic distances without destabilizing quantum coherence. But more than that, they have seen something unprecedented. In their millions of years of experience, the chamber fell silent as Maya's words took on the deeper harmonics that indicated she was channeling knowledge from beyond normal human consciousness. They have seen consciousness learn to love emptiness, and emptiness learn to nurture consciousness. They have witnessed the birth of true cosmic balance. As if summoned by her words, the space beyond the station began to shimmer. The Devourer fleet materialized from the void, but their ships no longer seemed predatory and threatening. They moved with a grace that spoke of partnership rather than dominance, their reality-bending hulls now creating patterns of beautiful distortion that enhanced rather than damaged the space around them. A communication channel opened, and silence that brings peace addressed the assembled delegates directly. Its voice, filtered through Maya's consciousness, no longer carried the terrifying weight of absolute negation, but rather the deep peace of perfect balance. Children of light and thought, the ancient entity spoke, you have achieved what we believed impossible. You have grown without destroying, expanded without destabilizing, created without consuming. Your species, led by this young voice bridge, have proven that consciousness can mature beyond the patterns we have observed in countless other galaxies. The Devourer's words sent ripples of emotion through the chamber. Representatives wept, cheered, and expressed joy in dozens of different ways as the weight of existential threat finally lifted from their civilizations. Therefore, silence that brings peace continued. We announce the end of our culling function in this galaxy. More than that, we offer our service as guardians of the balance you have created. We will help maintain the harmony between creation and void that preserves both consciousness and cosmic stability. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the full magnitude of what had been achieved. Not only had they saved galactic civilization, they had transformed the Devourers themselves from destroyers into protectors, from agents of ending into partners in eternal becoming. Keth Viren's mental voice touched her consciousness from the depths of the station. Well done, child. You have exceeded even the dreams of my creators. The galaxy has a guardian now, and consciousness has learned to dance with the void in perfect harmony. As the celebration continued around her, Maya found her thoughts turning to Earth, to the small blue world that had somehow produced a mind capable of bridging the gap between existence and emptiness. Her human heritage had not been lost in her transformation. It had been enhanced, becoming the foundation for something entirely new. The chamber's communication network carried her final words to every corner of the galaxy, words that would be remembered long after the current civilizations had evolved into forms unimaginable. Today we prove that consciousness is not a burden on the universe, but its greatest gift. We are the universe's way of understanding itself, and in learning to balance growth with rest, complexity with simplicity, meaning with silence, we have given existence itself a new song to sing. In the months that followed, Maya established the Institute for Cosmic Linguistics on Nexus Station, teaching the next generation of communication specialists to maintain the delicate balance between consciousness and void. Students from hundreds of species came to learn not just languages, but the fundamental principles of existence itself. Vexillar proved to be one of her most dedicated students. His initial prejudice transformed into genuine admiration for the human, who had become something more than any single species could achieve. Professor Thalkmet served as the Institute's historical advisor, ensuring that the lessons of the Great Synthesis would never be forgotten. And in the deepest levels of the station, Kethviren continued to dream the long dreams of dragons, guardian of ancient wisdom that had finally found its purpose in guiding the galaxy toward a future where consciousness and cosmos existed in perfect, eternal harmony. The girl who had been mocked for her impossible linguistic abilities had become the voice of life itself, proving that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a single word, spoken in perfect understanding. The galaxy had learned to sing a new song, and in that song, silence and sound, emptiness and meaning, existence and void danced together in the endless symphony of cosmic consciousness.